Hello, my name is Rachel Starr and I'm one of the tutors at Queen's in Birmingham. It's a delight to be with you as you begin to journey through the book of Ruth this month, and I hope you have a fantastic few weeks ahead of you as you get to grips with this really interesting and intriguing story. Thank you so much to Mark for inviting me to share a little bit about the first chapter of Ruth, but also to give you a little bit of a kind of introduction into this book before we get stuck into the chapter that we're going to look at this week. For some of you, Ruth will be quite a familiar text, I imagine, and perhaps it's a favourite story, one which in your head begins once upon a time and ends happily ever after. Perhaps for some of you, it's a bit of a frustrating story. You might have been introduced to Ruth as a role model for young Christian women, someone who is obedient and dutiful and increasingly silent. I hope not, but that might have been your experience. And perhaps it may be an unfamiliar story, a forgotten story, one that you're really only aware of because it appears at the beginning of Matthew's Gospel, when Ruth is mentioned as one of the 4 women in the genealogy that begins that Gospel. Whatever your experience with Ruth so far, I hope that you'll see Bible Month as an opportunity to revisit this book and to ask how this story helps you to see your own story. For me, it is a story that speaks of the messy, everyday realities of life and the struggle of many people to survive. It speaks of a God who desires to redeem and restore us, and who calls on us daily to participate in this saving work. And it is a story that tells how it takes all of us, not one of us on our own, but all of us working together to bring about justice and healing. Now, I've been reading and working with groups reading the book of Ruth for some time now, since I wrote the Bible magazine resources last summer. And what I've noticed in the last few months during the COVID pandemic is that I've read the book a little bit differently. I've seen how Ruth might be a story to travel with as we think about moving from times of hunger and loss to times of harvest and restoration. I've considered how Ruth might be a book that tells us about the companions along our way, those who will help us to reach where we need to get to. And thinking about Ruth as a book to stay at home with, I've wondered how many of us have felt lonely, like Naomi, hesitant about the right course of action, like Boaz, or watchful and alert, like Ruth, even through the quiet watches of the night. So what might it be helpful for you to know about before you return to Ruth or read Ruth for the first time? Well, Ruth is one of several short stories or novellas that we find within the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament, written to explore questions of life and faith. And it was most likely written after the time of exile in Babylon, as the Judean community were adjusting to life together again, but under Persian rule. They were no longer an independent nation, they no longer had their own separate rulers, and so they were kind of struggling to figure out who they were and what their identity could be in the face of the vast Persian Empire. Well, as we know from the past few years within Britain, when a community feels under threat, it often responds by building higher borders and retreating into itself. By saying, if you're not like us, you don't belong. By saying to foreigners, go back home, wherever that home may be. So Ruth speaks into a very similar situation, a community that is struggling to define itself. And it offers a different narrative. It tells a story of a young foreign woman who turns out to be David's ancestor, who brings about blessing to the community of faith, the community of Judah. And such a tale represents a direct challenge to the prohibitions against foreignness, against foreign wives in particular, that we read within the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. So Ruth is a book that talks back to other books and says, let's rethink what it means to be faithful let's rethink who we are. When is the book of Ruth read? Well, in the Jewish traditions, it is often read at the time of the spring harvest and the giving of the Torah. And it's read around that time, that celebration of Shavuot, because perhaps there's a lot of laws referenced in Ruth, so it seems an appropriate text to read when celebrating the giving of the Torah or the law. What kind of laws are referenced? Well, there's a lot about the right of the poor and the stranger to glean, and that certainly is the focus for chapter 2. And then in chapters 3 and 4 particularly, there is a focus on a different set of laws that are about the responsibility of kin, members of the wider community, to redeem lost land and to restore family lines that risk being lost. So there's a lot about redeeming and about gathering in those who are lost. Yet Ruth is not a book about the detail of the law, but it is about what it means to live out the law with your whole heart, joyfully, abundantly, generously, not worrying about the minor detail, but living fully before God, conscious of God's loving kindness and seeking to emulate that. And there's the idea within Ruth that this kind of generosity, this kind of loving kindness that spills over beyond what we are required to do, is in some way infectious. It passes between characters. One character acts and another responds with even greater generosity. And so my hope is that as we read this book of Ruth together, we also will be infected by that generosity of spirit and seek to live lives of loving kindness. A couple of years ago, I bought my mum and dad a Fitbit each, and they've been a great success and have enabled and encouraged us to go on many walks. The thing is that once a month, one or both of my parents manage to lose their Fitbit, and then we all spend a good hour searching through the house and garden, trying to retrace their steps in an effort to find the device that will tell them where they've been. I wonder what kind of journey Naomi's Fitbit would record if she had had one. What details would it hold? How she fled famine in Bethlehem, how she settled in a foreign land, how she lost her husband and both her sons, and how, stricken with grief, she retraced her steps in an effort to find out what she had lost. In this first chapter of Ruth, Naomi's grief overwhelms her. It defines her. Her husband and son's dead. She can hardly find her way back to Bethlehem. As she stumbles along the road, not even the kindest daughters-in-law can comfort her. And on arrival back home, not even her oldest friends can sustain her. Like Naomi, our own grief is not easily overcome. And over these past few months, we may have lost loved ones. Or it may be that during lockdown, we have missed even more acutely those we have already lost. We may be grieving the loss of jobs or savings, or the cancellation of holidays or celebrations. In our own way, like Naomi, we are grief-stricken. And like Naomi, we need to have the courage to name that, to bear witness to what is grieving and broken and bitter in our world. May we, like Naomi, lament with God over the violence, hunger and loneliness that mar our world. Now Ruth's journey is different. Unlike Naomi, she chooses not to return, but instead to journey on into the unknown. The text says that she clings to Naomi. It's a word that's used to describe the faithful clinging to God in their devotion, or one lover clinging to another. Ruth clings to Naomi. And in so doing, she clings to God. She does not choose between divine and human commitment. And like a number of other women in the Hebrew Bible, she does not travel alone in her search for God, but sees the benefit in journeying with another. There's a lot we can learn from Ruth here. She finds a companion, one with whom she will share what little bread she has before the harvest comes. Who have been your companions, I wonder, over the past few months? Have they been welcomed? Have they been unexpected companions? Have there been companions that are close by, at times too close by, or, for what I imagine for many of us is true, people that are still at far too much of a distance to us, who we long to hold and cling to once more? We, my parents and I, have new neighbours, a young couple who moved in just at the end of last year. They call out to us as we walk past their house on the corner on our daily walks. They bring round offerings of homemade cake. They clear rubble from the deserted space at the ends of our gardens and ask us for recommendations about builders and roofers. And one evening, like something out of a 50s magazine, they popped round for an actual cup of sugar. They pay attention to us, and we have been blessed by their companionship, even as we grieve those friends and family who we have not been able to see over these past few months. So, like Ruth, may we be attentive also to those who are lonely and in need, particularly at this time. And may we also, like Ruth, be generous in our friendship and our faith. Orpah. Orpah's journey is different again, and it's different in a number of ways. It takes us beyond the limits of the story that we're most familiar with. It's a sorrow to me, a sadness, that in both Jewish and Christian readings of this chapter, Orpah has been set against Ruth, portrayed as a disloyal woman who turned her back on her mother-in-law Naomi. And so while Ruth is presented as the faithful convert, Orpah is given the role of the disbeliever, stubbornly clinging to her own false gods. And yet, both have much to share with us if we are willing to walk with them. We read in the text that both women are praised by Naomi for their kindness or loyalty to her. Both display hesed, loving kindness. Both are willing to become foreigners in Judah for the sake of this foreign woman. Both weep at the thought of saying goodbye to this beloved woman. And both Naomi and Orpah brave a new and unknown future in different ways. One of my favourite biblical scholars is a woman from Botswana, Musa Dube, who has written extensively on different texts from the Bible, reading them in the context of HIV/AIDS, in the context of global poverty and gender inequality and violence. She is someone I would highly recommend you reading some of her work. She reads this story differently. She invites us to consider Orpah's story and how it might continue once it fades from view. And reading her reading of Orpah helps me to see what I haven't noticed in the story before and what I've overlooked. Musa Dube imagines that Orpah returned to care for her Moabite mother, as the text suggests. But she also goes further. She imagines that Orpah becomes an important leader for her own community and a sign of someone who is faithful and generous in her leadership. And Musa Dube imagines that over the years, Orpah kept in touch with Ruth, writing letters between Moab and Judah. So I'm going to read you a little bit of one of these imagined letters. Orpah writes, "I often wonder what became of you and Naomi in Bethlehem. Sometimes I wish I could see you. My daughter is named Ruth after you, for in this land you will never be forgotten. When you have borne children, Ruth, you should tell them stories of us, of the Moabites. You should tell them of their origins, of the kindness of their people, their hospitality and their struggles for survival. And so I say goodbye, your sister Orpah, who returned to her mother's house and to her gods. Like Orpah, may we know who God calls us to be. May we know our true selves and all that we have been made to be by God. May we know that we are beloved by God, the one who gives us life. It seems to me that Orpah reminds us that everyone has a home somewhere. No one, no matter what certain politicians or media outlets tell us, is simply a foreigner. Everyone has a story, a journey, a life that matters. And as the Bible tells us again and again, it is those who grieve with such sorrow, who are far from home, who are poor and lonely and afraid. It is those people for whom the heart of God beats strongest.